There's something almost magical about running your hand along the surface of an ancient stone wall, feeling the rough edges, the cool weight of history beneath your fingertips. At first glance, it might just look like a jumble of rocks stacked together, but look closer and you'll start to notice something extraordinary. These walls aren't just old, they're masterpieces of engineering, built with techniques so advanced that modern builders still can't quite figure them out. How is it that structures standing for thousands of years defy time, while some of our modern constructions crumble after just a few decades? The answer lies in hidden codes, secret methods, and brilliant tricks embedded in the stone by ancient craftsmen who understood the earth, the elements, and the very physics of stability in ways we're only beginning to grasp. Today, we're going on a journey to uncover 20 of these forgotten structural codes, each one a testament to human ingenuity. Picture this: stones cut so precisely they lock together without mortar, walls designed to channel rainwater away invisibly, foundations that shift with the earth instead of fighting against it. These aren't accidents, they're the result of knowledge passed down through generations, wisdom carved into the rock itself, and yet, somewhere along the way, we stopped listening. Modern engineering, for all its advancements, often misses the subtle genius of these ancient techniques, focusing on brute strength over harmony with nature. But what if we could rediscover what was lost? What if these walls are more than just relics? What if they're blueprints for a better way to build? By the time we're done, you'll never look at an old stone wall the same way again. Every crack, every uneven surface, every seemingly random placement of rock will start to make sense. You'll see the fingerprints of the builders who came before us, their secrets waiting to be read like a language written in stone. This isn't just about history, it's about unlocking solutions to problems we still face today. So let's step into the past together, peel back the layers of time, and uncover the hidden codes that could revolutionize the way we think about construction. The answers are right there, etched into the walls we've walked past for centuries, waiting for someone to notice. The first hidden code lies in the art of interlocking stones, an ancient technique so precise it defies modern logic. Picture a massive Incan wall in Peru, where blocks weighing several tons fit together so tightly you couldn't slide a sheet of paper between them. These builders didn't just stack rocks, they sculpted each one like a custom piece in a grand three-dimensional puzzle. Every curve, every angle was calculated to distribute weight evenly across the entire structure. When pressure or shifting occurred, the stones transferred the force sideways through their intricate joints rather than cracking under the strain. The Romans perfected this too, building arches and aqueducts that still stand 2,000 years later. What's astonishing is how modern construction often overlooks this wisdom. Today's engineers rely heavily on mortar and steel reinforcements, prioritizing speed and uniformity over the meticulous craftsmanship of the past, but mortar cracks. Steel rusts. These ancient walls, though, they move with the earth, adjusting subtly over time without collapsing. The secret isn't just in the precision, it's in the philosophy. Ancient builders didn't fight nature, they collaborated with it. They understood that rigidity leads to failure, while flexibility creates endurance. And here's where it gets even more fascinating. These interlocking designs weren't just about strength, they were about breathability. The slight gaps and intentional irregularities allowed walls to expand and contract with temperature changes, or even sway gently during earthquakes. Modern rigid structures often snap under such stress, but these ancient walls, they danced with the tremors and stayed standing. This leads us to the next revelation, how these structures weren't just built to last, they were built to adapt. The second code reveals how ancient engineers harnessed the power of movement, turning what we'd consider weaknesses into their greatest strengths. The second code reveals one of the most brilliant feats of ancient engineering: dynamic flexibility. While modern buildings often rely on rigid concrete frames that crack under pressure, civilizations like the Japanese and Minoans built walls that could dance with earthquakes. Take the 1,000-year-old temples of Kyoto, where wooden joints and stacked stones were intentionally designed with tiny gaps, just enough space for the structure to sway like a tree in the wind during tremors. Instead of resisting the force, these walls absorbed and redistributed it, bending without breaking. The same principle appears in the dry stone walls of the Mediterranean, where stones were placed with microscopic precision, allowing them to shift slightly during seismic activity before settling back into place. Here's what modern engineers often miss: those gaps weren't flaws, they were fail-safes. Today's construction tends to prioritize airtight rigidity, bolting everything together in a way that leaves no room for movement. When the ground shakes, these rigid structures take the full brunt of the force, leading to catastrophic failures. But ancient builders understood that flexibility was the key to survival. They crafted their walls like living systems, able to adjust and adapt to the Earth's movements rather than fight them, and the brilliance doesn't stop there. Some of these structures even had self-resetting mechanisms. In Peru, certain Incan walls were built with interlocking stones that would shift during an earthquake, but then settle back into alignment once the shaking stopped, almost like a puzzle snapping back into place. It's a level of foresight that feels almost futuristic, yet it was perfected centuries ago. This brings us to the third hidden code, one that transformed walls into self-sustaining systems. Beyond just standing strong, these structures were designed to work with the environment in ways we're only now beginning to appreciate. Imagine walls that didn't just resist rain, but channeled it away through invisible pathways, preventing erosion and water damage for centuries. The third hidden code might be the most ingenious of all: how ancient builders turned water from a destructive force into a willing ally. Walk through the ruins of Machu Picchu after a heavy rain, and you'll notice something remarkable. The walls remain dry, the stones untouched by erosion, even after 500 years. That's no accident. Hidden in the architecture are subtle slopes, almost invisible channels carved into the stones, designed to guide rainwater away with surgical precision. These weren't just drains, they were a symphony of gravity and geometry, each groove calculated to send water cascading harmlessly off the walls and into designated runoff paths. Compare that to modern construction, where water damage is one of the leading causes of decay. Today's flat surfaces and sealed materials trap moisture, leading to cracks, mold, and structural weakening over time. But ancient engineers treated water like a partner in the design process. In places like the temples of Angkor Wat, you'll find intricate networks of gutters and spillways disguised as decorative carvings, functional art that doubled as a drainage system. Even the dry stone walls of Scotland were built with a slight outward tilt, ensuring rain would roll off instead of seeping into the core. The brilliance lies in the details. These builders didn't just slap on downspouts or sealants, they integrated water management into the very DNA of the structure. In some medieval European castles, mortarless joints between stones allowed moisture to evaporate naturally, preventing the buildup that plagues modern masonry. And in the Middle East, desert builders used porous stones that absorbed nighttime dew, releasing it slowly during the day to cool the walls and prevent cracking from heat expansion. This wasn't just about longevity, it was about respect for the environment. Ancient builders observed how water moved through landscapes and mimicked those patterns in their designs. They didn't fight nature's rhythms, they harmonized with them, which brings us to the fourth code, where the true secret of these structures comes to light. They weren't just built on the land, they were built with it. Alignment with natural forces didn't just protect these walls, it made them stronger over time. The fourth hidden code reveals something astonishing. Ancient builders didn't just construct walls, they choreographed them with the sun and wind. Take the great Zimbabwe ruins, where massive stone walls curve and angle in ways that seem random at first glance. But study them longer, and you'll notice something brilliant. The walls are precisely oriented to shield against the region's fiercest winds, reducing erosion and structural fatigue over centuries. At the same time, their surfaces were positioned to absorb just the right amount of sunlight, stabilizing internal temperatures so the stones wouldn't expand and contract drastically with daily heat cycles. This wasn't guesswork, it was climate engineering at its finest. Modern architecture often fights against the elements with energy-intensive solutions like air conditioning or artificial reinforcements. But ancient builders worked smarter, not harder. In the deserts of Persia, for example, thick walls were designed with a slight tilt to cast cooling shadows during the hottest parts of the day, while in the Andes, high-altitude structures used dark stones to absorb warmth from the sun, preventing frost damage overnight. These weren't just buildings, they were ecosystems, finely tuned to their environments in ways that required no electricity, no maintenance, just an intimate understanding of nature's rhythms. What's even more remarkable is how these designs addressed thermal stress, a silent killer of modern structures. Today's concrete and steel expand under heat, creating tiny fractures that grow over time. But ancient walls, like those in the Alhambra, were built with materials and orientations that minimized these temperature swings. Their surfaces absorbed sunlight evenly, preventing hotspots that could weaken the structure. Some even used light-colored stones to reflect excess heat, keeping the interiors cool without a single watt of power. This leads us to the next revelation. These walls didn't just withstand time, they actively healed themselves. The fifth code lies in the ancient art of self-repair, where cracks weren't flaws but opportunities for renewal. In places like the temples of Malta, lime-rich mortar would slowly dissolve in rainwater, then recrystallize in gaps, sealing fractures without human intervention. It's a technology we're only now rediscovering, with modern scientists developing self-healing concrete inspired by these very principles. But for ancient builders, it was just another day's work, another layer of wisdom etched into the stones they left behind. The fifth code is where ancient engineering crosses into what feels like pure magic self-healing mortar. Picture a medieval cathedral standing tall for 800 years, its stones still tightly bound despite centuries of rain, frost, and shifting earth. The secret: mortar infused with organic materials like tree sap, egg whites, or even animal blood. When tiny cracks formed, moisture would activate these natural binders, causing them to swell and fuse the gaps back together. It's a trick modern cement simply can't replicate. In places like the temples of Bagan in Myanmar, you can still find walls where fractures sealed themselves over time, thanks to lime mortar mixed with local resins. The builders didn't just create structures, they gave them a kind of biological resilience, as if the walls were alive. What's heartbreaking is how much of this knowledge vanished. Today's cement is sterile by comparison, rigid and brittle, with no ability to adapt. Once it cracks, water seeps in, rusting reinforcements and crumbling the structure from within. But ancient mortar, it breathed. It reacted, it healed, and the science behind it is only now being rediscovered. Researchers are experimenting with bacteria-laced concrete that produces limestone to fill cracks, a modern echo of those medieval recipes. Yet the ancients were doing this effortlessly with materials they found in their own backyards. Now, shift your focus upward because the sixth code is all about defying gravity itself. Ancient builders didn't just rely on strong materials. They mastered the art of weight distribution in ways that still baffle engineers. Take the domes of the Hagia Sophia, where each stone was placed to redirect pressure downward in a perfect equilibrium, creating a ceiling that seems to float. Or the pyramids of Egypt, where colossal blocks were stacked in layers that dispersed weight so efficiently, the structures could withstand millennia of earthquakes. These weren't just piles of rock, they were precision instruments balanced like a house of cards that somehow outlasted empires. The genius lies in the subtle tricks. In Incan architecture, stones were often tapered slightly inward as walls rose higher, creating a self-reinforcing gradient that locked the structure into place. Gothic cathedrals used flying buttresses not just for support but to channel forces outward, turning potential weaknesses into decorative strengths. Modern skyscrapers, for all their steel skeletons, still rely on similar principles, but ancient builders achieved it with nothing but intuition and stone. What's striking is how these techniques turned sheer mass into an advantage. Where we might see a heavy wall as a liability, they saw it as a tool, a way to harness gravity's pull to make the structure even stronger. And that's the real lesson hidden in these walls. True engineering isn't about overpowering nature. It's about listening to it, learning from it, and letting it do the work for you. The sixth hidden code rewrites the laws of physics, or at least, that's what it feels like when you stand beneath the corbelled arches of Ireland's Newgrange. Built over 5,000 years ago, this ancient tomb uses nothing but carefully overlapping stones to create a ceiling that's held firm since the Stone Age. No mortar, no steel beams, just pure geometry and patience. Each stone juts slightly inward, layer after layer, until the gap at the top is small enough to be sealed with a single capstone. It's a technique so simple yet so effective that modern engineers still marvel at its longevity. While today's construction relies on heavy steel reinforcements to span open spaces, these ancient builders achieved the same result with nothing but gravity and clever positioning. What's extraordinary is how this method turns weight into an advantage. In a steel-framed building, the beams bear the load, but over time, metal fatigues and bends. Corbelling, though, it uses the stone's own mass to lock everything into place. The downward force actually strengthens the structure, pressing each layer tighter together. You can see it in the cliffside dwellings of Mesa Verde, where entire multi-story homes were carved into rock faces using this same principle, or in the beehive huts of Scotland, where storm after storm has failed to collapse walls built with this self-reinforcing design. Modern architecture often dismisses these techniques as primitive, opting for speed and uniformity over time-tested resilience. But here's the irony: corbelling isn't just old, it's adaptive. When the ground shifts or temperatures fluctuate, these structures flex and settle without cracking. Compare that to rigid modern materials which fracture under stress. The ancients didn't just build for their lifetime, they built for eternity, crafting ceilings that outlasted languages, empires, even climate shifts. And now, listen closely, because the seventh code is where these walls start to speak. From the temples of ancient Greece to the pyramids of Egypt, certain structures were designed with acoustic secrets so precise, a whisper at one end could be heard clearly hundreds of feet away. These weren't accidents, they were carefully engineered marvels, turning stone into soundboards that carried voices like invisible threads. Imagine standing in a chamber where the walls themselves seem to amplify your words, not with electronics, but with the very shape of the rock. That's not just craftsmanship, that's magic carved into stone. The seventh hidden code transforms stone into silence, an ancient art of acoustic dampening so sophisticated it rivals modern soundproofing. Walk through the corridors of a medieval monastery and you'll notice something uncanny. The thick walls don't just block noise, they swallow it whole. The secret lies in hollow cavities deliberately left between stones, filled with everything from crushed volcanic rock to wool or even dried seaweed. These materials acted like natural sound absorbers, breaking up vibrations before they could echo. In places like the underground temples of Malta, builders layered soft limestone between harder outer stones, creating walls that muted whispers and dampened footsteps. It's a stark contrast to today's soundproofing, which relies on synthetic foams and fiberglass materials that degrade over time and often trap moisture. The brilliance of these ancient techniques, they worked with physics, not against it. Modern walls often reflect sound, bouncing it back into a space until it fades. But ancient dampening absorbed energy, scattering sound waves through labyrinthine gaps until they dissipated entirely. In Japan, tea houses used walls packed with straw and clay, not just for insulation but to create pockets of stillness where even the rustle of a sleeve felt intimate. And in the deserts of North Africa, builders mixed sand into mortar, adding just enough granularity to diffuse echoes without weakening the structure. What's truly remarkable is how these methods serve dual purposes. Those hollow spaces weren't just acoustic buffers, they were passive climate controls. The same gaps that trapped sound also created insulating air pockets, keeping interiors cool in summer and warm in winter. Which brings us to the 8th code, where walls stop being mere barriers and start breathing like living organisms. Imagine a scorching afternoon in the Rajasthan desert where temperatures soar past 100 degrees. Step inside a centuries-old Haveli, though, and the air is startlingly cool. The walls, built with porous sandstone and honeycombed with tiny channels, draw in hot air during the day, cooling it as it filters through the stone's natural capillaries. By night, the process reverses walls release stored heat, maintaining a stable temperature without a single watt of electricity. This isn't just architecture, it's biomimicry at its finest, mimicking the way termite mounds regulate humidity or how tree bark moderates temperature. Modern HVAC systems fight the environment with brute force, guzzling energy to overpower heat and cold. But ancient builders designed walls that negotiated with the elements. In the Alhambra, intricate latticework screened harsh sunlight while allowing breezes to weave through courtyards. In the cliff dwellings of the American Southwest, shadows cast by overhanging rocks created natural cooling zones, with walls angled to maximize shade during peak heat. Every decision was a dialogue with the landscape, a collaboration between human ingenuity and the Earth's rhythms. And here's the kicker, these climate-smart walls required zero maintenance. No filters to replace, no ducts to clean, just stone and air working in quiet harmony. It's a lesson we're only now relearning, with green architects experimenting with breathable materials and passive ventilation. But the ancients had it down to an art, proving that sometimes the most advanced technology isn't about adding complexity. It's about listening to the world around you and letting the walls themselves do the talking. The 8th hidden code is where ancient walls become thermal batteries, storing and releasing energy with breathtaking precision. In the deserts of Iran, centuries-old caravanserais stand like oases of coolness, their thick mud brick walls absorbing the day's scorching heat only to radiate it back into the chilly night air. Step inside at noon and the temperature drops 20 degrees, not from air conditioning, but from the sheer mass of the walls themselves. This isn't just insulation, it's thermal alchemy. The same principle kept Scottish castles livable through freezing winters, stone hearths and walls soaking up warmth from fires, then releasing it slowly over hours. Modern buildings, with their thin layers of fiberglass or foam, can't compete with this kind of efficiency. But here's what's even more fascinating. These walls didn't just store heat, they timed it. In the cliff dwellings of Colorado's Mesa Verde, south-facing walls were built thinner to absorb sunlight faster during short winter days, while north-facing sections remained thick to retain that warmth. The result, a self-regulating system that required no thermostats, no fossil fuels, just an intimate understanding of how materials interact with sunlight and seasons. Compare that to today's energy-hungry HVAC systems, which fight against temperature swings instead of working with them. Now, shift your gaze to the carvings on these ancient walls. At first glance, they might seem like mere decoration, but the Ninth Code reveals something far deeper. Symbols weren't just art, they were structural reinforcements. In the temples of Khajuraho, intricate geometric patterns weren't randomly etched, they followed stress lines, distributing weight and preventing cracks like the ribs of a leaf. Norse stave churches used interlacing dragon motifs not just for mythic grandeur, but to visually guide the eye along load-bearing beams, subtly reinforcing the builder's intentions for future repairs. Even the zigzag patterns on Mayan pyramids served a purpose. The angles mirrored internal stone layers, creating a visual map of how forces flowed through the structure. This fusion of form and function is something modern architecture often misses. Today's buildings separate engineering from aesthetics, with decorative facades bolted onto steel skeletons. But ancient builders knew that beauty could be stability. A Celtic knot carved into a lintel wasn't just symbolism, it was a reminder of how tension should weave through the stone. When every curve and line had meaning, the walls themselves became teachers, whispering secrets of balance to anyone who knew how to look, and that's the real genius of these codes. They weren't just techniques, they were languages spoken in stone, sunlight, and the very air between the walls. To read them is to hear the voices of the past, offering solutions we're only now beginning to rediscover. The Ninth Code takes us beyond mere construction. It reveals how ancient builders turned art into architecture's silent partner, those intricate spirals on Celtic standing stones. They weren't just decorations carved along the grain of the rock, they followed natural stress lines, subtly reinforcing the stone's weakest points like the veins in a leaf. In India's Sun Temple at Konark, every floral motif and dancing figure was chiseled with a hidden purpose. The deeper grooves doubled as water channels, directing monsoon rains away from critical joints, while the shallower patterns highlighted load-bearing axes. This wasn't just craftsmanship, it was visual engineering, a language where beauty whispered structural secrets to future generations. Modern blueprints, for all their precision, often treat ornamentation as an afterthought, veneers glued onto steel frames. But ancient builders knew that symbolism could be stability. The Norse didn't just carve dragons onto their longhouse beams for intimidation. The serpentine curves mirrored the tension paths in the wood, showing exactly how weight should flow across the structure. Even the zigzag patterns on Andean walls served as built-in repair guides when a quake shifted stones. The broken lines showed precisely how to realign them. Now prepare to witness the 10th Code, where walls became puzzles only their creators could solve. High in the Andes, certain Incan structures feature stones with bizarre protrusions, knobs, tabs, even odd L-shaped notches. For centuries, these were dismissed as quarrying marks or unfinished details, but recent studies reveal something astonishing. These were keys, three-dimensional locking mechanisms. When earthquakes struck, the tabs acted like natural shock absorbers, allowing stones to shift just enough to dissipate energy before the notches guided them back into alignment. It's as if the builders programmed the walls with earthquake response software written in stone. The sophistication is humbling. While modern seismic retrofits require bulky metal braces, these ancient walls had resilience coded into their very DNA. In Japan, similar jigsaw masonry appears in samurai castles, where interlocking stones formed flexible joints that swayed during tremors. And in Turkey's Hagia Sophia, marble columns were intentionally set in lead-lined sockets, not for decoration, but to let them rock gently during quakes without toppling. Everywhere you look, ancient engineers were playing chess with natural forces, thinking 10 moves ahead. What's heartbreaking is how much of this wisdom was lost to time. Today's construction favors uniformity, identical bricks, standardized beams, but these ancient imperfections were the very source of their strength. A knob or notch wasn't a flaw, it was a fail-safe, a tactile algorithm for survival. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson these walls teach us. True resilience doesn't come from resisting change, but from designing for it, building not just for the world as it is, but for the world as it might become. The 10th hidden code is all about the power of a single perfect piece, the keystone. Picture the soaring arches of Rome's aqueducts standing strong for millennia. At the very top of each curve, there's one wedge-shaped stone that seems unremarkable at first glance, but remove it and the entire structure crumbles. That's the magic of the keystone, a masterstroke of ancient engineering where one precisely placed element locks everything into balance. Unlike today's modular construction, where identical parts are swapped interchangeably, these builders understood that sometimes perfection lies in a single, irreplaceable piece. Take the Pont du Gard in France, a 2,000-year-old marvel where each arch relies on a keystone cut to millimeter precision. The builders didn't just drop it in, they calculated its angle and weight to redirect the forces of the entire arch downward, turning crushing pressure into elegant stability. Modern bridges, for all their steel and concrete, often lack this kind of tailored brilliance. We default to uniformity, mass-producing beams and bolts, while ancient craftsmen treated every keystone as a custom solution, a signature touch that made their structures untouchable by time. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Keystones weren't just about physics, they were about philosophy. In Gothic cathedrals, the keystone was often carved with intricate designs or even hidden symbols, a nod to the idea that beauty and function were inseparable. These builders knew that the heart of a structure wasn't just its strength, it was its soul, and that soul resided in the one stone that held everything together. Now shift your gaze from perfection to imperfection, because the 11th code flips the script entirely. Ancient builders didn't just master precision, they harnessed the raw, uneven quirks of nature to their advantage. High in the Himalayas, dry stone walls snake across landslides and unstable slopes, their strength coming not from flawless cuts, but from stones carefully chosen for their natural bumps and curves. Instead of forcing rocks into conformity, the builders worked with their organic shapes, letting each one's unique contours create friction and interlock like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. This approach gave the walls a kind of organic resilience. When the ground shifted, these imperfect joints allowed subtle movement without collapse, something rigid, machine-cut stones could never achieve. In the terraces of Peru's Sacred Valley, you'll find stones with natural protrusions left intact, acting like built-in handles that anchor them to neighboring blocks. Modern engineering would grind these flaws away, but ancient wisdom saw them as hidden strengths. The lesson here is profound. Sometimes the best way to build isn't to erase nature's irregularities, it's to embrace them. These walls weren't just assembled, they were curated. each stone's so-called imperfections becoming the very thing that made the structure unshakable. And that's the real secret modern builders forgot. Perfection isn't about uniformity, it's about harmony. The 11th code reveals a paradox: what looks like weakness in ancient walls was often their greatest strength. Those uneven gaps between stones, the cracks that seem like signs of decay, they were masterstrokes of engineering, acting like natural expansion joints long before modern builders thought to install metal ones. Walk along the dry stone walls of England's Lake District, and you'll notice something curious. The stones don't fit together neatly. Some have jagged edges, others leave finger-width gaps. But when frost heaves the ground or storms batter the surface, these so-called flaws let the wall flex like a living thing. The spaces absorb movement, preventing the kind of rigid resistance that would shatter a perfectly mortared wall. This principle shows up in Japan's earthquake-resistant temples, where wooden beams were deliberately carved with slight imperfections. During tremors, these uneven joints would groan and shift, dissipating energy like a coiled spring. Modern engineers spend millions on steel expansion joints that rust and degrade, but ancient builders used nature's own irregularities: free, durable, and infinitely adaptable. Even the Parthenon's marble columns were designed with subtle curves to counteract optical illusions, proving that flaws could be solutions in disguise. Now listen closely, because the 12th code turns walls into musical instruments. High in the Andes, certain Incan walls hum when the wind hits them just right. The stones were precisely sized and spaced to create harmonic frequencies that counteract destructive vibrations. It's as if the builders composed a silent symphony in stone, tuning each block to disrupt seismic waves. Medieval bell towers used a similar trick. Their uneven staircases and arches weren't random, but calculated to scatter sound waves that could weaken the structure. Today, we dampen vibrations with rubber pads and shock absorbers, but ancient engineers let the walls sing their own stabilizing song. In Turkey's Hagia Sophia, hollow clay pots were embedded in the dome, not just to lighten the load but to break up resonant frequencies that could amplify earthquakes. These weren't just buildings, they were finely tuned instruments playing an eternal duet with the forces of nature. The genius lies in the details, where modern construction fights vibration with brute force: thicker concrete, heavier steel. Ancient builders danced with it, redirecting energy into harmless patterns. It's a reminder that sometimes the best defense isn't resistance, it's resonance, and that's the real secret hidden in these stones. They didn't just endure. They listened. The 12th code takes ancient engineering into the realm of physics, where walls didn't just stand firm against earthquakes, they disrupted them. In the temples of ancient Greece and the pagodas of Japan, builders mixed stones of different densities, some porous and light, others dense and heavy, creating a natural harmonic dampener. When seismic waves hit, these variations scattered the energy, breaking up destructive frequencies like a choir singing slightly out of sync. Modern skyscrapers use tuned mass dampers, giant pendulums, or weighted balls to achieve the same effect, but ancient builders accomplished it with nothing more than thoughtful rock selection. Take Japan's 5-story pagodas, which have swayed through earthquakes for over 1,000 years without collapse. Their secret: a central pillar made of flexible cypress, surrounded by layers of heavier and lighter woods, each chosen to counteract specific vibrational frequencies. It's not unlike how a guitarist adjusts string tension to avoid dissonance, except here, the instrument is an entire building, and the music is the Earth's own tremors. Now shift your perspective from physics to biology, because the 13th code reveals how ancient builders took cues from nature's original engineers. Termite mounds in Africa rise over 20 feet tall, with intricate ventilation systems that maintain perfect internal temperatures despite scorching heat outside. Ancient cultures from the Mali Empire to the Nabateans of Petra mimicked these designs, constructing walls with honeycomb-like cavities that channeled breezes and regulated humidity. In Mali's Great Mosque of Djenné, the earthen walls are studded with protruding wooden rods not just for decoration, but to create air pockets that expand and contract with temperature shifts, just like the fibrous tunnels in a termite colony. Even more astonishing, some walls borrowed from marine life. The spiral patterns on certain Incan structures mirror the Fibonacci sequence found in seashells, a design that distributes stress evenly, preventing cracks from propagating. And in the deserts of Iran, wind-catching towers modeled after the gills of fish draw cool air into buildings without a single moving part. These weren't just coincidences, they were deliberate acts of biomimicry, proof that the best engineering manual wasn't written by humans, it was written by evolution itself. The lesson here is humbling. While modern architects rely on energy-intensive solutions, ancient builders looked to ecosystems that had already solved these problems over millions of years. A termite mound doesn't need air conditioning, a seashell doesn't need reinforcements, and thanks to these borrowed blueprints, neither did the walls that stood for centuries whispering secrets we're only now relearning. The 13th hidden code shows us something extraordinary. Ancient builders weren't just stacking stones, they were taking notes from nature's oldest engineers. Walk through the ruins of the ancient city of Petra, and you'll notice something uncanny. The walls breathe. Just like termite mounds in the African savanna, these structures are riddled with narrow, winding channels that pull in cool air at the base and vent hot air out the top, creating a natural airflow that keeps interiors comfortable even in blistering heat. The builders didn't need blueprints or climate studies, they just observed how termites built their mounds to stay cool and copied the design. But the genius doesn't stop there. In the temples of ancient Egypt, walls were sometimes built with honeycomb-like patterns, mimicking the hexagonal cells of beehives. This wasn't just for decoration. The geometry of those tiny chambers distributed weight evenly, making the walls incredibly strong while using less material. Fast forward to today, and modern architects are just starting to rediscover these principles, spending millions on research into biomimetic design. Yet the ancients were doing it effortlessly, turning ant hills and honeycombs into structural masterpieces. Here's the irony: modern biomimicry often starts from scratch, as if no one ever solved these problems before. Engineers will study a termite mound for years to design a passive cooling system, completely overlooking the fact that the same idea was already carved into stone 1,000 years ago. It's like reinventing the wheel, except the wheel is right there, buried in plain sight. Which brings us to the 14th code, where ancient builders embraced a radical idea. Sometimes you have to let part of a wall die to save the rest. In coastal forts from Scotland to Japan, outer walls were often built with a softer, porous layer of stone, a sacrificial shield that took the brunt of wind and waves. Over time, this outer skin would erode, but it did so predictably, like a candle burning down. The inner core, protected behind this living buffer, remained untouched for centuries. Modern engineering tends to fight erosion with harder, more resistant materials, sealing everything behind impermeable barriers. But ancient builders understood that decay was inevitable, so they designed for it. Like a lizard shedding its tail, these walls had layers meant to be lost, buying time for the vital structures beneath. In medieval castles, you'll often find outer walls made of cheaper sandstone, while the inner keep is built of dense granite. The sandstone wears away, yes, but it does so slowly, evenly, and in a way that can be monitored and repaired. This sacrificial approach wasn't just about durability, it was about sustainability. Instead of using rare, high-strength materials for the entire structure, builders reserved them for critical areas, letting nature take its toll on the expendable parts. It's a lesson we're only now relearning, with modern, graded materials designed to degrade in controlled ways. But the ancients had it down to an art proof that sometimes the strongest walls are the ones brave enough to be a little vulnerable. The 14th hidden code flips conventional wisdom on its head sometimes. The best way to protect a wall is to let part of it wear away. Picture a medieval seaside fortress in Scotland, its outer surface pitted and scarred by centuries of salt spray and storms. At first glance, it might look like neglect, but those weathered stones were doing exactly what they were designed to do. Builders intentionally used softer sandstone for the outer layers, knowing it would erode predictably, absorbing the brunt of nature's fury while the harder granite core behind it remained untouched. It's a concept modern engineers call sacrificial cladding, now used in everything from ship hulls to space shuttle tiles, yet ancient masons mastered it with nothing but intuition and stone. What's remarkable is how these walls turned decay into a strength. In Japan's coastal castles, outer walls were often built with porous volcanic rock that crumbled gradually, dissipating the energy of typhoon winds before they could reach the inner structure. Like a boxer rolling with a punch, these sacrificial layers took the hit so the vital organs wouldn't have to. Modern architecture, obsessed with impermeable surfaces, often fights erosion with sealants and steel, materials that fail catastastically when they finally give way. But ancient builders designed for graceful degradation, creating structures that aged like fine wine, their defenses growing wiser with time. Now, here's where it gets even more fascinating. These walls didn't just endure erosion, they harnessed it. In the cliff dwellings of Turkey's Cappadocia, builders carved homes into soft, tough rock, knowing wind and rain would smooth and harden the exposed surfaces over decades. What started as fragile became indestructible, the outer skin calcifying into a natural armor. It's a lesson modern restoration often misses. Sometimes the patina isn't the enemy, it's the finishing touch. This leads us to the 15th code, where ancient walls defy logic entirely, structures that don't just resist time, but actually grow stronger with it. High in the Andes, some Incan walls develop a glimmering sheen after centuries of rain. The water reacts with minerals in the stone, forming a crystalline crust tougher than the original rock. In Ireland, moss-covered dry stone walls fuse into monolithic barriers as roots weave through gaps, acting like organic rebar. These weren't just static monuments, they were collaborations between human hands and natural processes, evolving long after the builders walked away. The genius lies in the long game, where modern construction often assumes materials will degrade. Ancient builders planted seeds of resilience that only sprouted with age. Roman concrete, for example, grows stronger in seawater as minerals slowly crystallize, filling microscopic cracks. Medieval lime mortar absorbs carbon dioxide over centuries, gradually petrifying into stone. These walls weren't built for the dedication ceremony, they were built for the grandchildren of the grandchildren. And that's the real secret modern engineering forgot. True durability isn't about resisting change. It's about designing for it, letting time itself become the final craftsman. The 15th hidden code feels almost like alchemy, where time doesn't weaken ancient walls, but transforms them into something stronger. Take Roman concrete, for instance. While modern cement crumbles in seawater, 2,000-year-old harbor walls like those in Pozzuoli, Italy, have grown tougher with each passing century. The secret: volcanic ash mixed into the mortar reacts with saltwater over decades, forming rare minerals like aluminous tobamorite. These crystals weave through the concrete like microscopic armor, filling tiny cracks before they can spread. It's the opposite of modern degradation. Instead of wearing down, these walls self-reinforce, turning the very thing that destroys our structures into their source of immortality. Even more astonishing is how this principle appears across continents. In the lime mortars of Cambodia's Angkor temples, rainwater slowly dissolves and recrystallizes the binder, creating a glue that actually tightens over centuries. Meanwhile, modern concrete, for all its lab-tested formulas, lacks this living quality. Once it cracks, water infiltrates, rusting the rebar inside until the structure fails catastrophically. The ancients didn't just build for their time, they built for deep time, crafting materials that matured like fine wine, their strength unfolding across generations. Now, shift your gaze from the sea to the swamps, because the 16th code defies gravity itself. How do you build a fortress on shifting marshland or earthquake-prone silt? Ancient engineers had a radical solution: let the walls float. Beneath the temples of Ayutthaya in Thailand, archaeologists found a forest of wooden pilings driven deep into the soft earth. But these weren't just anchors, they were flexible ones. When seasonal floods swelled the ground, the entire structure would rise and fall slightly, like a boat on gentle waves, preventing the kind of rigid resistance that cracks stone. The same principle saved Japanese pagodas during earthquakes. Their central pillars don't actually touch the ground, they hover slightly above it, suspended by interlocking beams. When tremors strike, the building sways like a pendulum, its weight distributed through the floating frame. Modern skyscrapers now mimic this with base isolators, but ancient builders achieved it with nothing but timber and intuition. Even the pyramids of Egypt might owe their stability to a hidden, floating layer. Geologists suspect massive limestone blocks beneath the foundations act like shock absorbers, redistributing the desert's shifting sands. What unites these techniques is a profound understanding of balance. Where we see instability as a threat, ancient engineers saw an opportunity to build with movement, not against it. Their walls didn't fight the earth, they danced with it, and that's the real lesson hidden in these stones. True resilience isn't about standing rigid. It's about learning to sway. The 16th hidden code rewrites the rules of gravity itself. How do you anchor a fortress in quicks or build a temple on shifting silt? Ancient engineers had a brilliant solution: let the foundations float. Beneath Venice's marble palaces, for instance, lies a submerged forest of alderwood pilings, their porous fibers absorbing water to petrify into stone-like durability over centuries. But here's the twist: these weren't rigid stakes driven deep like modern steel piles. Instead, builders wove them into flexible mats, creating a mesh that redistributed weight like snowshoes on soft terrain. When the waterlogged earth beneath Venice swelled or settled, the entire city swayed gently as one, its weight dispersed across thousands of these wooden platforms. Compare that to today's skyscrapers, where deep concrete caissons anchor rigidly to bedrock, a costly, energy-intensive process that struggles with unpredictable soils. Ancient floating foundations, though, they turned instability into an asset. In Cambodia's Tonle Sap region, entire villages perch on bamboo grids that rise and fall with monsoon floods, while the pyramids of Teotihuacan in Mexico rest on layers of volcanic gravel designed to absorb seismic waves like a shock absorber. These weren't just workarounds, they were masterclasses in working with the Earth's whims. Now, lean closer, because the 17th code reveals something even more astonishing. Certain ancient walls don't just sit on the landscape, they remember it. High in Peru's Sacred Valley, some Incan structures feature stones with odd protrusions, knobs, bumps, even grooves that seem purely decorative. But recent studies suggest these were tactile maps, encoding how each block should be placed relative to its neighbors. If an earthquake dislodged stones, the grooves acted like alignment guides, helping rebuilders slot them back precisely as originally designed. It's as if the walls carried their own assembly instructions, etched into the rock itself. Medieval cathedrals used a similar trick. Masons carved cryptic symbols onto stones, not just signatures, but directional markers indicating load-bearing sides or ideal orientations. In France's Chartres Cathedral, these marks form a hidden language, ensuring that even if the structure was dismantled, future generations could reconstruct it perfectly. Modern construction relies on digital blueprints vulnerable to data loss, but these stones, they're their own archival system, weathering centuries without fading. The genius lies in the foresight. Ancient builders didn't just construct for their era, they embedded resilience into the very fabric of their work, leaving clues only the initiated could read. A groove here, a notch there, silent whispers across time, proving that the greatest engineering isn't just about strength, it's about leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for the future. The 17th hidden code reveals something almost mystical: ancient walls that remember their own blueprints. High in the Bolivian Andes, the ruins of Tiwanaku feature stones arranged in repeating geometric patterns like fractal puzzles. At first glance, these spirals and zigzags might seem purely decorative, but look closer. Each layer mirrors the one below it, creating a self-similar design that could guide repairs centuries later. If a section crumbled, rebuilders could simply follow the fractal instructions embedded in the surviving stones, ensuring every replacement block aligned with the original structural logic. Modern restorations, for all their 3D scans and 6D models, often lack this kind of intuitive guidance, forcing engineers to guess at long-lost techniques. Now tilt your gaze upward, because the 18th code transforms walls into living history books. Across the deserts of the American Southwest, ancient Puebloan structures bear faint stripes in their masonry, alternating bands of light and dark stone. These aren't random, they're weather records meticulously logged by builders who tracked decades of drought and deluge. A dark layer might mark a season of heavy rains, while a pale band could signal years of scarcity. Like tree rings in stone, these walls encoded climate data into their very fabric, creating a tactile archive for future generations. The sophistication is breathtaking. While modern meteorology relies on fleeting digital records, these builders crafted permanent monuments to the sky's whims. In the Scottish Highlands, dry stone walls curve subtly to deflect prevailing winds, their angles preserving centuries of storm patterns. And in Yemen's skyscraper city of Shibam, mud-brick towers show stratified layers of straw and clay, each mix adjusted to withstand the weather conditions of its era. These walls didn't just endure the elements, they chronicled them, turning architecture into a living almanac. What's tragic is how much of this wisdom faded when we switched to uniform concrete and steel. Today's buildings might last decades. These weather-coded walls lasted millennia. They stood not just as shelters, but as sentinels, whispering secrets of resilience to anyone who knew how to read the stones. And that's the real magic of these codes. They weren't just about surviving the past, they were about teaching the future. The 18th hidden code turns ancient walls into time capsules, not just of human history, but of the earth itself. In the ruins of Çatalhöyük, one of the world's oldest cities, archaeologists discovered something remarkable. The mud-brick walls were flecked with ancient pollen grains, perfectly preserved for over 9,000 years. Each speck told a story: what crops grew nearby when drought struck, even how forests receded over centuries. These weren't just building materials, They were accidental archives capturing snapshots of ecosystems long gone. Modern concrete, sterile and uniform, can't compete with this kind of accidental genius, but the real magic lies in the intentional layers. In the cliff dwellings of Arizona's Canyon de Chelly, builders mixed volcanic ash into their mortar during periods of heightened eruptions. Centuries later, scientists can trace those ash bands like tree rings, dating construction phases to specific years when distant mountains spewed smoke. Even more astonishing, some medieval European cathedrals used mortar tinted with crushed seashells during prosperous years, a subtle record of trade routes and economic booms hidden in plain sight. Today's walls, homogeneous and forgetful, hold no such secrets. Now, listen closely because the 19th code is where walls start to sing. Across the deserts of Peru and the highlands of Turkey, certain ancient structures hum when the wind hits them just right. The stones were precisely sized and spaced to create harmonic frequencies, turning entire facades into giant wind chimes. But this wasn't just artistry, it was physics. Those vibrations dissipated destructive energy during storms, preventing cracks from forming. Modern skyscrapers use tuned mass dampers to achieve similar effects, but ancient builders did it with nothing but geometry and intuition. In the temples of Malta, corridors were angled to amplify specific frequencies during rituals, while Mayan pyramids channeled rainwater into hidden channels that produced eerie, flute-like tones during downpours. These walls weren't silent witnesses to history, they were active participants, their voices woven into the very fabric of daily life. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson of all: the past didn't just build to last. It built to speak. The 19th hidden code turns walls into instruments of urgency, resonance chambers designed to carry warnings across vast distances without a single wire or speaker. Deep within the pyramids of Egypt, narrow shafts and hollow cavities weren't just structural quirks, they were ancient PA systems. When priests or guards chanted into these slots, their voices amplified through the stone like whispers through a megaphone, traveling farther and clearer than any shout. In the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde, hollowed-out walls acted like natural bullhorns, projecting alarms across the canyon during raids. Even the catacombs beneath Rome were engineered with undulating surfaces that turned murmurs into echoes, ensuring messages passed between hiding early Christians without detection. Modern security systems rely on fragile electronics, wires that fray, speakers that short-circuit. But these ancient acoustic networks, they were fail-proof, carved into the very bones of the buildings. In the temples of Malta, spiraling corridors funneled sound waves into focused beams, allowing a single voice to be heard clearly hundreds of feet away. And in the Scottish Highlands, certain Brock's stone towers built 2,000 years ago feature interior galleries that resonate at frequencies that carry over wind and rain, turning human speech into an audible beacon during storms. Now prepare for the 20th and final code, the ultimate secret etched into these walls. Beyond engineering, beyond acoustics, ancient builders embedded something even more profound: warnings. High in the Andes, certain Incan walls feature stones carved with symbols that only make sense during the solstice. When sunlight hits at a precise angle, shadows reveal jagged lines, a hidden message urging observers to seek higher ground before monsoon floods. In the caves of Cappadocia, undulating patterns on ceilings mirror seismic fault lines, a tactile map showing where cracks would first appear during earthquakes. These weren't just decorations, they were survival manuals written in stone. Medieval cathedral masons left, which marks crisscrossed grooves near foundations, not as superstition, but as coded indicators of weak points needing reinforcement after floods. Even the pyramids of Giza align with stars that, when certain constellations rose, signaled Nile flood seasons to ancient farmers. Everywhere you look, walls weren't just shelters, they were teachers, whispering secrets of the land to those who knew how to listen. The tragedy: we stopped listening. Modern construction erased these silent languages, replacing them with sterile concrete and disposable warnings, paper signs that fade, digital alerts that glitch. But the stones still speak. The final lesson isn't just about how to build, it's about how to remember. These walls weren't just made to last, they were made to guide. Long after their builders turned to dust, their voices remain, etched into the rock like a promise. If you pay attention, the past will show you how to survive the future. The 20th hidden code is perhaps the most urgent of all. Ancient walls that didn't just withstand disasters but predicted them. In the cliffside villages of Nepal, certain stone walls were built with deliberate, almost imperceptible tilts, not construction errors, but early warning systems. When the ground beneath began to shift, these walls would lean further, their subtle angles acting like natural seismographs long before modern sensors existed. Similarly, the dry stone terraces of Peru's Sacred Valley featured strategic, weeping cracks, tiny gaps designed to widen visibly when soil moisture reached dangerous levels, signaling landslide risks months in advance. These weren't flaws, they were fail-safes, engineered into the very fabric of the structure. Compare that to today's high-tech monitoring systems, expensive networks of electronic sensors buried in hillsides or bolted to bridges, vulnerable to power outages and data corruption. Ancient builders achieved similar results with nothing but observation and stone, turning passive structures into active sentinels. In medieval Europe, castle walls sometimes incorporated soft mortar layers that crumbled predictably under rising damp, giving caretakers years to reinforce foundations before serious damage occurred. Even the pyramids of Giza show evidence of stress marks and delicate grooves carved into certain blocks that would fracture in specific patterns if the structure's balance was compromised, offering a tactile roadmap for repairs. The tragedy is how much of this foresight we've abandoned. Modern construction often treats cracks as purely cosmetic, covering them with plaster or sealant instead of reading them like the vital signs they are. We've outsourced vigilance to brittle technology, forgetting that the best warning systems might be the ones baked into the walls themselves. Now, step back for a moment, because the real mystery isn't how these codes worked, but why they vanished. How did civilizations that built for millennia lose techniques that outlast empires? Part of the answer lies in the Industrial Revolution's rush toward standardization, where speed and uniformity trumped patience and craftsmanship. But deeper still, it's a story of severed apprenticeships, of knowledge once passed hand to hand now buried under concrete and steel. The Incas didn't write manuals, they taught through touch, showing each generation how to feel the fit of stones like a locksmith sensing a tumbler's click. Medieval masons guarded their mortar recipes like state secrets, entrusting them only to those who'd spent decades mixing and molding, yet hope isn't lost. From the high-tech labs of Japan, where engineers now study Incan polygonal masonry to improve earthquake resilience, to the Scottish stonemasons reviving dry stone techniques for modern flood barriers, the revival has begun. The codes aren't gone, they're dormant, waiting in the walls themselves for those willing to look closer. And perhaps that's the ultimate lesson: the past didn't just build to endure. It built to teach. All we have to do is listen. Here's the paradox of modern engineering: the very advancements that let us build faster and taller may have blinded us to the deeper wisdom hidden in ancient stones. When the Industrial Revolution swept across the world, it brought a seismic shift in priorities: efficiency over artistry, uniformity over individuality, speed over longevity. Factories churned out identical bricks, steel beams replaced hand-carved lintels, and concrete slabs erased the need for intricate stonework. The mantra was progress, but the cost was craftsmanship. Suddenly, walls weren't built to last centuries, they were built to meet quarterly deadlines. And in that rush, the subtle genius of interlocking stones, self-healing mortar, and seismic harmonies got buried under the weight of standardization. But here's the twist: technology, often blamed for disconnecting us from the past, is now helping us rediscover these lost codes. Laser scanners map the microscopic precision of Incan masonry, revealing how stones fit together with barely visible gaps. AI models simulate the acoustic properties of medieval cathedrals, decoding why whispers carry so clearly down their vaulted halls. Drones capture the fractal patterns of dry stone walls, showing how their irregularities create resilience. For the first time in centuries, we're peeling back the layers of time, not with shovels, but with algorithms. Yet there's a catch: these tools are only as insightful as the questions we ask. And that's where humility comes in. Modern engineers often approach ancient structures with a quiet arrogance, assuming primitive means inferior. But the truth is, we're just beginning to grasp the sophistication behind what we once dismissed as rudimentary. Take Roman concrete. For decades, scientists assumed its durability was accidental, until they discovered it was deliberately engineered with volcanic ash to thrive in seawater. Or consider the floating foundations of Venice, long seen as a happy accident, now recognized as a deliberate strategy to accommodate shifting tides. The lesson: ancient builders weren't guessing, they were innovating with a deep, observational wisdom we're only now learning to quantify. So how do we bridge this gap between old and new? It starts with collaboration: masons working alongside materials scientists, historians consulting with seismic engineers. In Japan, architects are reviving traditional timber joinery to create earthquake-resistant skyscrapers, blending centuries-old techniques with carbon fiber reinforcements. In Scotland, dry stone walls are being studied for flood prevention, their natural drainage systems outperforming concrete barriers. Even self-healing concrete, infused with bacteria that produce limestone, echoes medieval recipes using organic binders. The future of construction isn't about choosing between ancient and modern. It's about realizing they speak the same language, just in different dialects. The real breakthrough will come when we stop seeing these codes as relics and start treating them as open-source blueprints. Imagine a world where every new building carries the DNA of a Maya temple's rainwater channels or a Gothic cathedral's load-bearing carvings. Where engineers don't just calculate stress tolerances but also study how termite mounds regulate temperature. The irony is delicious. The more high-tech we become, the more we need the low-tech wisdom of those who built without blueprints, without cranes, without computers. Their greatest innovation wasn't just the walls they left behind. It was the invitation to look closer, think deeper, and remember that sometimes the best way forward is to reach back. These 20 hidden codes aren't just relics of the past, they're urgent lessons for the future. While modern engineering races toward taller skyscrapers and smarter materials, the ancients mastered something we're still struggling to replicate: harmony with nature. Their walls didn't just stand against time, they collaborated with it, turning wind, water, and even earthquakes into allies rather than enemies. Imagine if today's bridges could heal their own cracks like Roman concrete, or if apartment complexes channeled breezes as effortlessly as a termite mound. The irony is profound. The more high-tech we become, the more we need these low-tech truths. This isn't about nostalgia, it's about survival. As climate change reshapes coastlines and cities sink under their own weight, the wisdom in these stones offers real solutions. Dutch engineers are already studying floating foundations inspired by Venice's wooden pilings to combat rising seas. Japanese architects are reviving flexible joints from medieval pagodas to earthquake-proof modern towers. Even self-healing concrete, a cutting-edge innovation, echoes medieval mortar recipes infused with tree resin. The past isn't just whispering to us, it's shouting. The question is, are we ready to listen? So let's turn this into a conversation. Which of these codes resonates most with you? Is it the Incan stones that lock together like a puzzle, or the Gothic cathedrals that hum in the wind? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because the best ideas grow when we share them. And if you're as fascinated by these hidden histories as we are, hit subscribe. Together, we'll keep unearthing the forgotten genius etched into the world around us, one stone at